You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Why are some companies able to innovate over and over and over again, instead of just having these random successes every now and then? It comes down to process, and that's what we're going to learn how to do today. During the NACS Show General Sessions, the whole focus was on inspiration. How do you inspire thinking, learning, innovation? That was the focus of a panel led by Conexxus Executive Director Gray Taylor. We wanted to talk to two companies, Sheetz and Google, about how they look at innovation and set up processes where you don't just have clever ideas every now and then, but you have them on a regular basis, and even when they don't work, you learn something. Let's take a listen.
Why are some organizations able to come up with great ideas and execute them over and over again? How do you inspire innovation? Well, we've got two people up here who can give us some great answers. So first, I'd like to please join me in welcoming Emily Sheetz and Vish Ganapathy. So I think people are very familiar with Emily. We may not know as much about you as we do Emily. So why don't you give us a little background on you, Vish?
Sure, thanks. Vish Ganapathy, I'm based out of Atlanta right here. I work for Google. I lead customer engineering for them for the retail and consumer goods industries for North America. And I probably spent 27 plus years in retail, so I consider myself a retailer, even though I've not been in the business per se, but I've been on the information technology side of it, helping our customers grow.
Great. So I'm going to start with our first question. We all have technology as a significant part of our portfolio's daily work life. The perception is that technology is essential and drives innovation. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that's probably a typical misconception these days, especially since technology rules all of our lives, right? And it's constantly accessible to our customers. I think technology really, though, should be seen as a tool of innovation rather than the driver. I would say at Sheetz, we've found our most success on driving innovation when we're trying to innovate around the customer or delivering that better experience for our customer.
Vish?
No, I completely agree. I mean, purely technology-based innovation is what we consider shiny objects, right? It's not sustainable. It might drive a lot of enthusiasm and interest for the first few, Some of the best innovations are delightfully analog, right? I mean, you look at the McDonald's Egg McMuffin innovation that somebody created in a store in Santa Monica, which now turned out to be the largest or the highest selling products, and the list goes on and on. WD-40. Why is it called WD-40? Because it was the 40th attempt after 39 failures that they actually got it right.
That's interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. So, what's the mistake that most organizations make when they're trying to innovate effectively?
Well, I've seen a couple things. That first one is, again, going back to that customer and really understanding what your customer wants and maybe what they need. Not what you think they want or not what you're good at, so you're going to tell them what they want. I think really having that deep understanding of that customer really helps you to drive towards the value. So innovating towards value. That takes knowing who you are really well as well, because some of us can do some things very well, can't do other things. So knowing who you are, I think, is a core part. I think a major misconception about innovation generally that people have is that it's this big nebulous thing that only these great inventors like the Steve Jobs of the world can do effectively. This brilliant innovator in the corner, coming up with these new ideas. And I think innovation is much more of an iteration. It's much more, if you can derive processes from it to help it keep going and be sustainable. I think that's really important to think about what innovation management means, which is different than retail management, operations management for sure, takes kind of two different skill sets to do those well. So like just developing that discipline of innovation management is critical. But what do you think?
No, I completely agree. I mean, you mentioned knowing the customer. That literally is the very first thing that we say. You've got to understand the customer, have empathy for the customer before we go to the next level. We did a survey in Google a couple of years ago, and we do this regularly. And the question that we ask to the entire company is, what are the things that need to be in place for you to innovate more? And the number one thing they talk about is we need a safe, non-judgmental environment, because innovation takes risk-taking. Without risk, there's no innovation, right? So I think to add to Emily's point, you have to know the customer, which gives you an understanding of the tone of the innovation you want to establish. But how you go about doing that requires that safe environment, the ability to fail. I mean, all the reasons that you guys, when you established your innovation center, right? Because that requires, think about it this way. The world's most unsuccessful innovator is Thomas Alva Edison. Over 1,000 unsuccessful innovations. But we don't know him for that. But without those, he's not going to be as successful as what he was, right?
So I like the idea that you're talking about, okay, they have to feel safe. All of us are raised to say, if you don't perform, you're going to get fired. Just cutting it down. So you either have to hire people on the spectrum who don't care, or you have to train them that it's okay to fail. How do you go about doing that?
Well, I think Vish was exactly right, about that culture where people have a sense of safety. They have a sense that, they can go out and try things and know that they're not going to get fired, if they don't do it well. If that's the culture, it's not going to create a space where people are going to stick their neck out there for anything, frankly. But that has to start from the top, too, don't you think? Leadership has to create, this environment, this space where people feel like, they can take risks. You don't innovate without risks.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think innovation comes in different shades and forms, right? In Google, we have a separate group called Google X, and they are looking at moonshots, things that will come, will be come into fruition 10 years from now. And that's a different type of innovation. But we're talking something more than that. We're talking about creating an innovation culture within the organization, which is a lot more pervasive. And that has to come bottoms up. To your point, it has to be endorsed from the top down, from an environment perspective, but the actual innovation has to come from bottoms up. So the people on the front lines, the people who are working with your customers, the people who are doing the job every day, they are best equipped to know what's going to work. Because once again, innovation is not about a shiny object. It can be a process change. In fact, some of the most impactful innovations we have seen, it's got nothing to do with the end consumer. It's got everything to do with your brand that the end consumer sees, which is your store associate. I mean, spectacular innovations at that level, which in turn results in better experience. Those things don't get the press because they're not as exciting, but they are literally the most impactful innovations we have seen. And that comes from the bottoms up. They come up with those ideas.
Yeah, I completely agree. I want to go back to Google X, though, because I think that's a really great parallel. Maybe we copied you a little bit with our innovation center in Pittsburgh. When we have this vision of putting Sheetz as we know it out of business, we recognize that we can't ask the people who are running the business 24/7, doing an excellent job at it, to also put themselves out of business. So we created this separate space that's more like a Google X.
Yeah.
But innovation at Sheetz or anywhere can't be just that. You can't just pass it on to this group and say, okay, that's your job to innovate. It has to be a part of everyone's job to an extent, and this is how you define innovation. Is innovation just like creating this brand new business model? No, it's about how do you do your job day in and day out better? Yeah. How do you continue to look at what your piece of running this company is and say, how can I do that better today? And sometimes that is making it easier for our store employees, right?
Yep.
So when I say thinking about the end customer our successful innovations have gone the whole way back through the value chain.
Yeah.
There are many that you wouldn't say, well, that's a customer-facing thing, but at the end of the day, it drives towards that more effective, efficient experience for everyone involved.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Emily, you have a Pittsburgh office,
Yeah.
and I don't think that's by any mistake. So, are you there really to work with some of the educational institutions that are there, get some graduate level students? I mean, bring in some outside talent to help you get some fresh eyes review?
Well, we're there broadly to really tap into the ecosystem, which includes Google's our neighbor, and other technology businesses or startups, but absolutely the universities. So the universities are a fantastic partner for us from a number of different standpoints. They're doing cutting-edge research, technology development across so many different disciplines that our business is in. We don't have the time or capacity to really be stretching to where they are. So if we can partner with them, we're getting access to this really just cutting edge thinking. And then I think it is mutually beneficial because in the academic environment, they're really focused on maybe more the conceptual. They would love to work on real world problems. So we come to them and say, hey, well, we have this real world problem. Can you apply your thinking to that? So they get a real world experience that is valuable, for them coming out of school, and we get some great product. So it allows us also to expand our thinking and our work beyond what our employee base has the capacity for. And then on the back end of it, it is a fantastic recruiting tool. So, when students get access or exposure to our work, our company, how we treat people, then we actually become a viable option, for somebody coming out of even graduate school, to come and work for Sheetz. So it is a win-win-win all around.
So you're stealing employees from Google?
I don't know if we've been able to do that yet, but I'm working on it. Yeah.
And the other question, since you're in Pittsburgh, you got Carnegie Mellon there, you got Pitt. Those are very great tech schools. Yeah. Are you guys turning your back on Penn State?
Oh, absolutely not. Penn State is our original partner and very, very deep-seated relationship with Penn State. So we're just, looking to expand our network.
Okay, great. I was going to go back to culture a little bit because we've talked about what the good portions, the good parts of what you need. What are some examples of bad cultural values that are just complete headwinds?
Go first.
Well, let me give you an example of a client that we worked with. I'm not going to mention any names, but it's an environment which absolutely does not foster innovation. So we were doing some work with them. And what we discovered was they wanted to be innovative. They wanted to do really exciting things, but they were so paralyzed by not wanting to take risks that everything required a very stringent gating process. And we discovered the team within their IT that was focused on creating the business case was bigger than the team going to build stuff. So you can imagine, that is exactly how you don't want to innovate, right? Because you're trying to innovate without taking risks. That's not really innovation. That's simply being risk averse. And you're trying to just tread water till the value chain gets disrupted by someone else. Right. So I think that would be a good example when you overthink it. But it's also important not to make rash decisions. So a good example, I was mentioning this yesterday, Google's got this thing about Google Arts. So if you go to Google Arts, you'll see all these arts and museum arts that's all digitized and shown. The genesis of that is this. We had an engineer who went back to Israel to meet family, and he was in the Holocaust Center. And he was just absolutely amazed at the videos and the pictures that was there. And he said, well, a lot of people don't get to see this. So he took it upon himself, using Google's 20% do innovate whatever you want project, to start digitizing that. And then he showed that to Larry and Sergey, our founders. Larry basically says, why just that museum? Why not all museums? So you know what he did? He literally rigged a camera And then he had Marissa, who went to become the CEO at Yahoo. Literally, they took a book, and she started turning pages, and he was taking pictures, just to see how long it takes to go do that. And once they were convinced that the hard part was not impractical, they launched, that's what Google Books got launched. So now you go to Google Books, and we have digitized, thousands and thousands of open source books. That all came about with some grassroots project that somebody did because they were passionate about it, right?
Well, you touched on a number of things there that are, your markers of like not a good culture. What I could probably add to that is we have found success in innovating when we are open to learning. And open to learning allows us to experiment. So experimenting similar to how you're talking about there, you make small experiments that allow you to learn something small and then build on that. So you don't go into those knowing what you want and what the answer is going to be. You go in there with this sense of curiosity about what could happen, and you could be wrong. And that is great because that's a learning. So it's kind of a reframe of failure to an extent, to instead say, I'm not failing, I'm learning, and I'm not going to make the same mistake again. I'm going to keep building on that learning. So to address your question a little bit more positively, I would say, what does make a good culture for innovating is a good dose of curiosity and a great dose of humility. You're not always going to be right in innovation, but you can always learn.
Yeah.
So we've all managed product portfolios or service portfolios, and some of the bad ideas stick around like a bad cousin. You just can't get rid of them. Nobody likes to fail, but how do you judge and minimize the impact of a failure so it doesn't hang around and you get to the fast learning on the thing? What kind of criteria do you use to assess what you're doing and say, nah, we're done on that one?
We've probably all been there. I think the way that we've tried to work through that, or not put ourselves in that position again, let's say, is to frame the question or the problem from the beginning in a way that allows you to be open to what the end result is. If you go in with this idea of this is what it's going to be and I'm going to make this work no matter what, you'll probably get stuck in this loop of, objectively failures. You're not going to call them that because you're going to win no matter what. And you're going to end up spending a ton of money and a ton of time, and what are you going to get for it? So instead, if you can design, I think, a system and those processes that we were talking about earlier where you enter into that exercise with a question. And then you have these tools or these processes that enable you to fail quick and fail cheaply is really important. I think that mitigates that risk of like these big failures or these big expenses.
Vish, you guys like to do things at scale. How do you kill them before they become scale problems?
Well, I should first tell you that around 30 to 33% of all products that Google puts out are failures. And in fact, you go to YouTube, there's an SNL video about Google Glass, which is really hilarious. I showed it to a group of people yesterday. And we're totally fine with that. Now listen, there is an initial, think of it as an incubation space when you're spitballing ideas. And we are encouraged to never respect everybody's ideas, and we're encouraged to never say no. Like you say something, I add on it by saying, and we can do this, and we can do that. That allows us to put all the ideas on the whiteboard. And to your point, we start with the customer, and we have this back of the envelope or back of the napkin type statement. In other words, can you write a simple pragmatic statement without any buzzwords, what this innovation expected to do? Don't tell me how you're going to build it. That's the means to the end. What are you expecting it to do? Now, once everybody agrees on a consensus basis and commits, then the failure is immaterial because we will learn from it, right? Because it's going to have to be no regrets failure. In other words, I innovated something and it didn't work out, but I learned a lot from there and I can apply somewhere else. So Google failed with Google Plus. Google failed with our Google Chat that was part of Google+. Well, guess what? We have repurposed all that into Google Workspace. So when we use Google Meet, all that is built on top of the same technology. And the list goes on and on. I mean, I was telling you, I think yesterday on sidebar conversation, in my former company, IBM, many years ago, they had this thing where they engraved the letter IBM on a grain of rice, if you remember that. Well, they don't know what to do with it. Well, that's the technology that went to make LASIK for rice. It's the exact same technology, right? Bubble wrap, created in the 70s as a interesting texture for your wallpaper. Big failure. Till IBM decided to wrap its PCs and start shipping it in the 80s, and then bubble wrap became a completely different animal altogether. I mean, there are so many of these examples where it might be a failure in one aspect, but it might be successful elsewhere, or you may learn something very interesting from there that you can apply somewhere else, right? But once you have committed as a team to go forward with a piece of innovation, that needs to be no regrets at that point, right? You're committed at that point. Till then, everything is open for debate. You can choose to throw it out if it's not a good idea, so on and so forth. Once you're committed, you have to go forward.
So what you've explained is there's another exit strategy from a failure, which might be the Phoenix success, right? When you were talking about Google+, taking the bones of things that failed famously, although I used them, I like them. But you came up with a new platform, fixed some of the issues, and realized that putting these two things together made it a heck of a lot better. Have you ever had one of those things that's just like throw it in the trash and maybe a couple years later all of a sudden it's viable?
Well, I think that's really important to call out what they're doing is learning.
Yeah.
Right. So they can build off of that because they've learned from it, and you went with the idea of I want to learn from this, and I love that 30% of things that Google puts out fails, and you celebrate that. Like that's fantastic. So we copy a lot of what Google does. Yeah. Great job. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I have an example of something that like sat around for a long time because we couldn't make a decision about it. So we have a history of being innovative, particularly in our kitchen. And so, the marketing team wanted to put fryers in our kitchens and thought that could be a really great driver for customers and obviously revenue. The fryer is really messy and dirty and dangerous sometimes and expensive, and so the operations didn't really want to do it, and it was a ton of capital to put that in. I don't know, it was 300 stores at that point. So we kind of went back and forth on it, couldn't make a decision for, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And then finally we decided to move forward with it, and it's like our biggest, revenue and profit driver in the kitchen at this point. So it's not exactly what you asked about, but we just let it sit there, and then it took off.
So that's the mold effect of innovation, where it just kind of sits around and gets moldy until somebody dusts it off and says, let's do it.
Yeah.
By the way, my son has a recipe for getting the fryer smell out of your pants. I'll give it to you if you like it. You got it from Pizza Hut. So.
Yeah, thank you. Do you have a booth downstairs?
Yes.
Okay.
So we're running out of time. I'd like to thank Emily and Vish. This has been, just a really fun panel to be on. Favorite topic of mine. So, everybody, thank you, Emily and Vish.
Thank you.
So, thanks for listening to that panel. We have much more to share from this year's NACS Show, and look forward to sharing more from different events leading up to next year's NACS Show, which will take place October 7 through 10 in Las Vegas. See you there. And thanks for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.